In this presentation, I want to talk a little bit about utilizing sound inside Unity. Sound can be pretty straightforward and intuitive as long as you pay attention to a couple of the pitfalls that come with using sound. And the big thing to keep in mind when it comes to using sound inside Unity is whether you want to use a 2D sound or a 3D sound. And a 3D sound occupies a specific space inside the Unity environment, and as you approach an object that has a 3D sound attached to it, or you approach that independent sound object in space, the sound volume will increase and it will drop off as you move away from that sound. Whereas a 2D sound will play at a constant volume regardless of your position relative to the sound in the space. So I want to point out that inside the lessons folder I've provided a sounds.zip file, and these are just a couple of examples that you can experiment with and follow along in this demonstration to experiment with some of these sounds. So now there's a lot of assets online where you can find free sounds that you can use. You can create your own assets, your own loops, make your own samples. Unity likes WAV files and MP3s, and so if you generate those files, you can integrate those directly into Unity. So download the sounds.zip file to your desktop, unzip it, and then drag the sounds folder into your assets folder, and that'll give you a similar setup to what I'm looking at. And I'm just going to jump inside my sounds folder. I'm going to focus on the loops folder at this point. And the loops folder is just intended to be some examples of some background sounds that we can use. And I'm going to use these to demonstrate the difference between 3D and 2D sounds. So inside the loops folder, I'm just going to select this bubbling sound file. And once I select it, I can preview it at the bottom of the inspector by hitting the play button. That'll give me a preview of what the sound is. Now, once I have that sound selected, if I look at the inspector, I want to draw your attention to the fact that this is a 3D sound, and the 3D sound dialog box has a check in it. And what that's saying is that by default, use this sound as a 3D sound object. And what that allows us to do is to drag the sound into the hierarchy view, and we could either attach this to an existing object or just drag it into the hierarchy view, and it'll generate its own sound object. And you can see that with that sound, it adopted the file name, and now this sound exists in this physical space. Okay, and with that sound selected, I can look at the inspector and see that there's some parameters here that I can adjust. Now, the only thing that I want to turn on here at this point is I want to make sure that this sound loops, that it plays over and over again. Okay, now you can see that this sound exists in a specific space, and if I hit the play button and I send my marble over to that position, as I approach this, you can hear the sound getting louder. Okay, and as I move away from it, the sound gets quieter. Okay, and that's because it's a 3D sound and it occupies a space in the 3D map. And you can adjust the degree at which this sound falls off. There's a curve here that the farther away you get from it, the more dramatic this curve flattens out, and that'll just control the volume of the sound. Now, because this is a sound loop, it might make sense that I want to play this sound in the background, and I want to hear this at a constant level regardless of my position in space. So in this case, what I'll do is, just for the sake of the demo, I'll get rid of the 3D sound that I dragged into the scene. I'll select the same audio track, but this time I'll uncheck 3D sound. So I'm in the process of converting it to a 2D sound. I'll hit the apply button. Unity processes that sound, and now when I drag this in and I'll drop it into the space, it's still represented by this audio source, but when I hit the play button, we hear that music playing in the background. And now I forgot to check the loop, so I expect the sound to stop playing here in just a moment. But regardless of where we are inside of our scene, we hear that sound in the background. I'll just toggle my simulation off, I'll turn loop back on, and I'll hit the play button. And again, because this is a 2D sound, it still exists inside the environment, but it's playing independent of my position relative to the sound, so I hear it at a constant volume. So that's the primary difference between a 2D and a 3D sound. And you're only going to want to use 3D sounds when you associate a sound with an object or a physical place and you want that drop off, that volume increase and drop off as you approach or move away from the sound. So keep that in mind. The next presentation, I'll walk you through the process of attaching a sound effect to our menu item or a menu object that we created in a previous presentation, and I'll review that process really quickly, and we'll do that in the next presentation.